Hello, my name is Alina Hayes, and I would like to share with you my coil building style. So when I first started working with clay, I loved wheel throwing. I loved the symmetry and the shape and the smoothness that it provided. When I began coil building, I found that my objects were more organic and had texture from my fingers that I didn't really like. So I developed this sort of method of coil building that allows me to create the same type of voluptuous streamlined shapes that I like making on the wheel, but without having to throw large sums of clay. So as a result, this is easier on your wrists. And if you're a beginner on the wheel and can only throw and center small clay objects, this allows you to build really, really big, but get the same type of smooth look you would on the wheel. So here we go. Step 1, hair up. So here I'm going to be working with a stoneware clay called B-Mix with sand. It is a really good clay body for a beginner. It's made by a company called Laguna. Here in California, we're lucky we have clay producers, so we don't actually have to make our own clay, so that's very, very helpful. This clay has sand particles in it, so it's really good if you're a beginner. It helps with shrinking, it helps with any sort of cracking issues that you might get from starting to work. So let's get started. I'm going to cut off maybe about 1/2 inch off the top of this. Okay. Always cover your clay up when you're not working with it. So first I'm going to roll out my base. Now I know some people, when they roll their slabs, they use those little wooden planks to keep you from rolling one side thinner than the other. I don't really use these planks. I just got into the habit of learning how to roll out slabs. So once you have it, and you can kind of see how thick it is, right? I don't want it to be much thinner than this, okay? Because I'm going to be making a pot that's 14 inches tall at the minimum. So I want my base to be, you know, roughly as thick as my walls are going to be, which is about maybe 1/4 of an inch or so. Maybe a little thicker than that. So here I have a banding wheel, and I have a little rounded piece of wood that I'm going to put my clay on. And here, what you have to do is you have to figure out how wide you want your base to be, okay? I have this piece here that I'm gonna place over the top because I don't want my bottom to be too wide. If you start with a really wide bottom, okay, and you're gonna start to open up, think of how huge your pot is going to be. So before you even start, you should have sketched out some sort of an idea as to what shape you're going to be making, so you can keep yourself on track. So now that you have your base, and you have an object that you're going to be using to cut around the base. This could be anything. You can use a bowl, you can use another round object. Now also, your bottom doesn't have to be round. It could be oval, it could be, you know, an organic amoeba shape. Whatever shape you'd like to make is certainly up to you. But for this demo, and for this video, I'm just going to use my needle knife and cut around the outside. Okay, so now I have my bottom, I have my base. What do you do with this extra clay, you ask? Well, you re-wedge it and reuse it. Can I make my coils from this? No. Do not attempt to make coils from this piece of clay. Why? Because it was stretched in one direction, and now because I smushed the clay back, I'm going ahead and I'm wedging this piece back up. But that is a conversation for another time. What I'm going to do with this clay is I'm gonna put it in my bag, cover it up really, really tightly, and save it for another time. So now that you have this base, okay, what do you do? Some people like to use slip, which is a liquid clay. I don't use slip. This is fresh clay. It's plastic, it's straight out of the bag. What I'm gonna do though is I love this little tool. It's called a serrated rib. This right here is going to be a game changer for making smooth, symmetrical works. It has little teeth. I'm going to use the teeth to score the outside of my base. This is where I'm going to attach my first coil. Okay. Now that you scored this base, it is time to begin to roll your coils. So how do you roll out coils? What I like to do is I like to take about an inch off the top of the bag. So I have my square. And then I like to slice that square in half. That gives me 2 of these rectangles. Okay, so here we go. Then, what I like to do is I like to pinch squeeze this into a makeshift, very organic, very loose coil. Now the one thing you might want to notice is that while I am pinching it, I am maintaining the same width, okay, throughout. So while it looks kind of rough, you can see that I am stretching and it's getting longer as I'm pulling it and squeezing it. Okay, so as you can see that as I'm doing this, my clay is getting longer. But again, while the shape itself is very rudimentary and primitive looking, the thickness of the coil itself is more or less the same. Okay, so now that I have this, I will start to roll. What you might want to do, especially as a beginner, okay, if you've never done this before and you're coming at it brand new, you might want to, this might be too much clay for you to roll out at once. So it is not a bad idea to go ahead and cut these in half. So you can set that one aside. We're just going to focus on this one. Now notice as I'm rolling what my fingers are doing. Okay, I'm rolling and my fingers are spreading as I go out. What I'm trying to avoid, getting a flat side. Usually when beginners roll their coils, that's kind of what they get, okay? But here, I am gently rolling it out, trying to keep this coil from getting too out of hand, meaning too long for me to be able to comfortably roll. Okay, so this is almost as thick as I would like for it to be. I would like for my coils to be around as thick as my finger. That's kind of a comfortable place. So here I have it. This is a pretty good coil. One thing I don't recommend, and I'm gonna roll this up into a round while I'm talking about it like this, okay? One thing I don't recommend is I don't recommend making too many coils at once and then using them, and you think that that's gonna streamline your process. It won't. What it'll do is it'll end up making your coils drier, and when you go to attach them, it's going to be more prone to cracking. So this is the part that reminds me of baking or making handmade pasta. Now notice, this is a gentle roll, right? I'm not making this coil go back and forth. It's just a half stretch and a half of a roll. So that is my coil, and you can use my finger for reference. Okay, it's maybe a little thicker than my finger, but it is more or less around the same. And look at how, now, you may notice, you can see from handling the clay, okay, as I'm rolling it around, I'm starting to get a stress point right here. Okay, so be extra careful when you're stretching to try to stretch your coil evenly so you don't get a thin point or a thin area where it starts to break. If it does happen, it is almost better to just cut the coil at that point and have a shorter coil that you can incorporate than to have that thin spot there built into your pot. Okay, so so you can see from that one block of clay, right here, for that half of a square, okay, I was able to get these coils. Okay, so now that you have your base and your coils, we're going to put them two together. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to score one side of the coil. That is the side that I'm going to be attaching to my base. I'll take my coil, I will lay it down against the scored area, and I will use my thumb to compress the inside first. Now this part is sort of important, okay? When you reach the side, what you want to do is you want to cut your coil on a bias, okay? The reason why you want to do this is because you want to increase the surface area of the clay, okay? And you want to push one side in, and on the outside, you want to move it in the opposite direction. So now that I've compressed my interior, I'm going to run my thumb on the inside and to really make these two pieces of clay look like they are now part of the same. I'm going to do the same thing to the outside. I'm going to push my thumb on the outside while supporting the inside wall with my 4 fingers. Okay, so now here you have it. You have incorporated your first coil. Here's something to consider though. Okay, you really have to decide what shape you're going for here. If you're going to open it up really wide, if you want to go narrow or if you want to go in. I do want to open this up, I do. But for the first coil, I might want to just press and squeeze this a little bit inwards, because right now it's going out too far, more like a bowl maybe. But I am not interested in having this first coil go so far out. Kind of want to control this, okay? Because if I keep going, if I left it like that, the pot would have been going out quite significantly, and because I have a fairly narrow base, chances are it would have collapsed. So keep this in mind when you're building, okay? Now I'm going to go ahead, score the top again, and I'm ready to attach my second coil. Now here's where I really wanted to show you a close-up of this process. So notice this messy looking thing I have on one side, right? And then look what I have here. So this right here is almost like a pinch coil combo where I press and squeeze. Notice what my fingers are doing, okay? Watch. My fingers start separated, but then when I squeeze, they touch each other. Okay, so it's a pinch and a lift, pinch and a lift, okay, while I'm moving this clay up. And I'm also compressing, and I am also making this pot taller. Look at how much taller this is making this pot. Also though, this pinching is making my walls thinner, which is not necessarily a bad thing, okay? So now I'm kind of beginning to have this sort of really irregular, very rough looking pot. So this right here is the time where this comes in, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to use the rib while my inside hand is supporting the wall on the inside, but my outside hand is moving all this clay into one area. Now it's too early to see anything yet, but that's how they all start out looking like. So what this does is it pulls clay out from the high points, filling in the low points, compressing the wall all the while. Now we're getting somewhere. One thing you may notice as you're building, as you're pinching your coils in place, you will notice areas like this. This is where the clay coil was not properly compressed or heavily compressed. Same as here, okay? So these areas are areas for potential cracks. So what you would want to do is you would want to make sure that when you find one, you just go ahead and you apply pressure and you use your rib to compress that area. So up until this point, I haven't really talked about paddling, and I haven't talked about this wonderful tool. Essentially, this is just a wooden spoon that I use, but you can purchase wooden paddles. I love this spoon because of the shape. It has a curve on the side. It's curvy linear on the C. You can kind of see it. So it's perfect for rounded objects. Okay, so I use this in place of a paddle. If you notice, we have about halfway of our pot, body of the pot, it's starting to come in, okay, and it's gonna go up and I'm gonna build a neck. So here, you notice where my fingerprints are, right? This is usually what, you know, a lot of the coil boat pottery looks like. Now, if you spin this around, it is fairly, right, even all the way around, but it's not perfect, right? So we can improve this shape further. So this is where the paddling comes in. So I support the interior with my inside hand, and I will just lightly paddle, but notice my paddling direction. It's almost like I'm paddling up. It's this sort of moving upward motion that's happening here as I'm going around. So this is a really good tool to shape the pot, to get rid of any sort of imperfections, or if one area sticks out more than the other, you can paddle it in. And so this is really a wonderful tool that evens everything out and really streamlines the shape of your object. So if you have one side that's a little higher, you can paddle that in. If you have a side that comes out a little bit more on one end, you could paddle that in. Subsequently, also, if you have a side that comes, you know, one side is a little bit more voluptuous, the other side's a little flatter, you can also go in on the interior of your pot and you can paddle it out. So this is a really, really good tool for when you're shaping. So now if I step back and take a quick look at the profile, right, or the side of my pot from my angle, okay, I can really see which side is tapered in a little more, which side comes out. And so I'll spend a few minutes here really shaping and seeing what I like and do not like. I'd like to take a moment to talk to you quickly about transitions. As you can tell, we've reached a point where the body of the pot is almost completely finished, and we're going to start moving inwards and then build the neck. So what do you do when you want to move your clay inwards? Well, when you move your clay inwards to push it forward, take your fingers and you squeeze them together, okay? See that? You squeeze them together. You're trying to reduce the surface area. Likewise, if you want to push your clay out, okay, you're going to take it and you're going to bend it out. Okay, so you can see, right here it is. It's starting to move outward this way. So if you want to move in, you squeeze your fingers and you push in. If you want to move out, you turn outwards to move out. As you continue to work and you begin to close in your form to build your neck, as it's starting to come and round, as you begin to create this shoulder, okay, from here you can see this shoulder. this little area right here, this shoulder, this arch, is going to be holding the weight of your entire neck. So if you're building and your piece is fairly plastic, meaning you can push into it fairly easily, it might be a good idea to take a pause at this point to allow this shoulder to set up a little bit. So what I like to do is I like to wrap plastic just around the area where the last coil was attached. So if I want to return to this, and I would say maybe half an hour should be sufficient, okay? So if I want to come back, my shoulder will be a little bit firmer, but my neck area where I'm going to be attaching additional clay, that is still going to be nice and plastic. So I'm going to be able to compress the next coil without any problems. Okay, so after this, we are going to be building the neck and then for the smoothing part. It's the next day. This piece is now roughly completed and finished. You can see that my neck is looking quite gnarly. I wanted to leave this to set up overnight, so that way my lip here is not too floppy. So how do I address this neck? Well, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to center this piece on the wheel fairly loosely, just to get an idea of where it is in the middle. Looks pretty centered to me, not terribly off. And then I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and I'm going to find the lowest point. I'm going to hold it steady and rotate. Off. You can also use a needle tool, but I find that this works better. Almost a little uneven. So when I have this lip here and I trim it off, okay, then you can come in with this handy little tool. It's made by Stanley. You can get this at Home Depot or Lowe's. And then I go ahead and I shave off any areas that are uneven. I will also shave the sides. Just run my finger along the edge to compress and clean this up to give it a refined, finished edge. So now we're at this stage where here we are. So now we're at the stage where we're not keeping this texture. We never were. This was just to get our clay nice and smooth. So I'm going to be working with two tools. First, I'm going to be using the metal rib with no teeth. This comes in your basic toolkit for throwing for clay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shave, so you can see. I am shaving a thin layer. Now you can tell that my pot has been setting up, because as I'm shaving this, it's no longer moving really. There's no clay there's no way to, if I put my finger in, it's not going to create a divot. So I can go ahead and apply a significant amount of pressure to shave off this clay. So while this is cleaning it up quite significantly already, it is not giving me this super smooth surface that I am after. Close, but not 100%. Also, I should mention, as you're building and you're constructing your form, how do you know when to stop? How do you know that this is a good proportion for your piece, regardless of what you're making? This applies to no matter what shape you're working with. It's a basic design principle of thirds. It's a compositional concept, whether you're working on painting or whether you're working on sculpture. The idea is that if you divide the piece into 3 even parts, more or less, that would complete the piece. And in this instance, I have about that. And you'll notice that sometimes when you're working on a piece, it just looks odd. Sometimes it looks out of place, and chances are that's because your proportions are off. But if you follow the rule of thirds, you will find that your piece will start to be more pleasing to the eye. So here I have more or less finished one side with this rib. And now I'm going to come at it with this silicone rib. This is a mud tool made by Michael Sherrill. You may have seen them. There are these nifty little soft silicone ribs. By the way, none of the tools that I'm using in these videos is sponsored, so this is an honest opinion. So now I'm going to go in with my silicone rib, and I'm going to smooth and compress this wall. Look at this. Now, this portion is perfect leather hard right now. This is an excellent time to carve your piece if you should so want. It's quite lovely, but the bottom, okay, is giving me a little bit of trouble because this is the part that's been hanging out the longest. So I'm just gonna go ahead and spray it with water, give it 2 minutes to absorb into the pot, and then I will finish it off with my mud tool. is smooth, it is symmetrical, and now you can move on to decorating the surface. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe for more awesome videos on ceramics.